Hello and welcome back on board the Royal Research Ship Discovery. My name is Ali, and in the last video I explained how we were going to take you on a series of short video tours of this incredible ship, allowing you the chance to explore from the comfort of your own home. Now, all of the best tours of Discovery should start with a fantastic introduction telling you everything the ship has done, all the places it's been, all the people who've been on board, giving you a chance to understand why this ship is so important and why it's incredible it's still here to this day. And so that is what we're going to cover in this video. Now, if we were to go into a time machine and go back to March 1900 and just 500 metres to the east of where the ship sits now, you would see them starting the construction of this amazing vessel. Then fast forward just 1 year, March 21st, 1901, and you would see the ship being launched into the River Tay. Now from there, they weren't quite completed. They had to tow it round into the Victoria Dock, and then using the 90-ton steam crane, lower in things like the engines and boilers. Now these were made by Gourlay Brothers of Dundee, and at the same time as other equipment, they also took on the sails, made by Baxter's of Dundee, a true Dundee ship in every sense. Now, after very successful sea trials, they then took the ship down to London, taking on the final equipment, supplies, things that had been built up down in London while the construction was taking place of the ship. Now, this expedition, which eventually became known as the Discovery Expedition, named after the ship, was the one that was going to take Captain Scott, Ernest Shackleton, Tom Crean, Frank Wild, all these incredible people of the heroic era of Antarctic exploration, down to Antarctica for the very first time. So, after London, they sailed down to Cowes, where for a very brief spell they had two very important guests on board, the King and Queen, and it was with their royal wishes that the ship sailed off on the expedition proper. Going from Cowes, they went to Madeira, to Trinidad, South Africa, and then on to New Zealand. And it was in New Zealand that it was the crew that were treated like royalty. They were given food, drink, parties, dinner evenings. They also had free transport laid on for them. They had an amazing time down there. But eventually, of course, it was time for them to head off for the great white unknown. And so, as they sailed off from Lyttelton, 21st of December 1901, every crew member wanted to be the last to say goodbye. And so some of them took to climbing up the rigging and taking the chance to say goodbye as far as they could. Now, one of those crewmen, a man called Charles Bonner, took things just one step further. He didn't just climb the rigging, he didn't just climb into the crow's nest, he climbed on top of the crow's nest. And it was from there, after losing his balance, he fell head first onto the metal engine house, killing himself instantly. He was the only person to ever die on board the ship in its whole history. But that tragic start meant that they didn't celebrate Christmas that year, and with a sombre mood, they set off on the expedition, just doing the work they were assigned to do. Now, the Discovery expedition is incredibly well recorded, so I'm not going to cover too much detail about that this time. We will talk about it obviously lots more in all the other videos, but for the moment, we're just going to think about what the ship has done and where it's been. So at the end of the Discovery expedition, as the ship returned to the UK, there were lots of ideas and hopes for what the Discovery would be used for next. Sadly, in need of money, the Royal Geographical Society put the ship up for sale, along with the Terra Nova and the Morning, the two relief ships that had helped free the Discovery. So, that meant that a ship that had cost £55,000 or thereabouts in 1901 was sold for just £10,000 in 1905. It was sold to the Hudson's Bay Company and became a cargo ship, running the North Atlantic runs and going from the UK over to the Hudson's Bay area, taking food, supplies, men, and then bringing back cargoes such as furs that had been trapped for the fashion industry, and on one occasion even bringing back a live bear to go into London Zoo. Now, there were a couple other notable moments during the Discovery's time officially owned by the Hudson's Bay. One of those was the potential rescue of Ernest Shackleton after the Endurance was crushed and sunk in the ice. Now, the Discovery had been requested, the Admiralty quickly refitted her, and they had her towed most of the way to try and go and rescue Shackleton's men. The ship reached all the way to Montevideo in South America when eventually they were told that Shackleton had finally managed to rescue his men himself on the Chilean ship, the Yelko. So the Discovery returned back and carried on being working as a cargo ship. One other potential expedition at that time was also thought of. Commander Stackhouse had the idea of a new Antarctic expedition, and over time The expedition plans progressed to something that could have been over 7 years long and would cover the entire globe, all the oceans being researched. Now he went off to the US, trying to raise as much money as possible so that the expedition could take place. He gave the Hudson's Bay Company £1,000 to keep the Discovery in place, and off he went to the US. On his return, having guaranteed almost $1 million of financial support, he was very tragically killed after the Lusitania, the ship he was sailing on, was sunk by a German U-boat. And so that expedition never happened. And the Discovery's next expedition wasn't going to be for a good number of years after that. Now, during the First World War, the ship was used as a cargo ship helping with supplies, and so it stopped off in ports such as New York, Archangel, Bordeaux, Brest, and it even stopped in Dundee. But the next big expedition, this was the time the ship was back to the way it should be. Now, to do that, in 1923, the ship went in for refit. Now, this took over 2 years and cost over £140,000 to do. But it meant that the ship was as strong as it could be and ready to go once again back to the southern oceans. It went on what became known as the British Oceanographic expedition. This was the one that was going to look in for the first ever time into the conservation of whales. Now, this was not for nice reasons. This was to make sure there was always going to be enough whales to hunt. But it did start the idea of conservation thinking. They looked into the migration patterns, the eating. They looked into everything they could of whales, what they were, and how they lived. At the end of that 2 years of work, 1 year alone was over 38,000 miles covered by this ship. They had a huge volume of work that they could start to progress on. Now, the types of work they were doing are still carried out to this day by modern research vessels. The Discovery set the scene for the types of work carried out around the world to this day in oceanographic research. The final expedition the Discovery went on was known as Banzar, or Banzari, depends on who you speak to. It stands for the British, Australian and New Zealand Antarctic Research Expedition. This was the one under the leadership of Sir Douglas Mawson. Now, as well as doing other research work, the Discovery had an amazing feature to help her explore as much of Antarctica as possible. A 2-seater aircraft. Sitting up on the beams, the aircraft could be lowered down on a block and tackle, and using floats, of course, to work on the water or onto the ice, it could then take off and chart way more coastline than the Discovery ever could in the same amount of time. Now, at the end of that expedition, 1931, the Discovery was too small, it didn't have enough distance and fuel capacity. This was not the ship people were looking for doing either research or cargo of any kind. And so, a very uncertain future. Douglas Mawson himself had an idea that maybe the ship could go back to Australia and be used as a museum ship. Unfortunately for us now, that didn't happen, but the ship did have a new life. She was sold to the Boy Scouts Association and became a training ship for Sea Scouts and a hostel for Scouts visiting from around the world. In that time, from 1937, when it was handed over officially, through to 1955, hundreds and hundreds of Boy Scouts trained on board this vessel. But in 1955, eventually the money that they'd been given to help them buy the ship and to run it was running out. And so the ship, for the first time and the only time in her life, became HMS Discovery. She was owned by the Admiralty. She became part of the drill ships for the Royal Navy Reserve and stayed in London from 1955 to 1979 as part of that fleet. But come 1979, even the Royal Navy were struggling to keep up and justify keeping a ship of this type. Now, there were lots of ideas of what could happen, including an amazing one which could have seen the ship being towed out and used as target practice. There was a great uproar about that, and it was the Duke of Edinburgh himself that apparently helped stop that happen completely. Now, a new plan had to be drawn up, and what brilliantly for us was the start of the conservation and restoration of this ship into the way she is now. And it started by the Maritime Trust. They took her into St Catherine's Dock and became part of their historic fleet. And the work that they did set the scene for the way we do the work now here at Dundee Heritage Trust. She's been back in Dundee since 1986, where after a short piggyback ride, she was brought from London up as part of a loan agreement, a long-term loan with the Maritime Trust, Dundee Heritage Trust and the Scottish Development Trust. And this would see what became the rebirth of the city of Dundee the tagline becoming Dundee City of Discovery. Now, an incredible amount of work has taken place since that time, including the building of the Discovery Point Museum and fitting out the dock where she sits, which used to be where the ferries coming from Fife would stop, but this is now her permanent home here at Discovery Point. In 1995, the Discovery was finally bought for the grand total of £1 and became an official part of the Dundee Heritage Trust collection, the largest object, obviously, in the collection. And it's here at Discovery Point we normally welcome thousands and thousands of visitors every year, as well as my lucky job of looking after the thousands of school pupils who come on board and learn all things Discovery. Now, it is because we can't currently welcome people on board we are doing these videos. So, I hope you've enjoyed learning a bit about the background of the ship. Obviously, there's a huge amount that's taken place and I can't cover it all in such a short space of time. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. And also, please again, subscribe, like, share on all the different platforms to try and make as many people as possible understand the story of the Discovery. Okay, so the next video we will be looking at features on the deck itself, things that help the ship survive, and also then thinking about the next steps, which will be to go below deck. So I hope you'll all join us next week for the next video. Thank you.